Well, Jim, Ginger, I'm so excited to have you guys on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Man, I know we've got a ton to talk about, so we're going to literally dive right in. I would love, Ginger, you can go first, and then Jim, but I would love for you guys to just kind of tell us a little bit right now where you're at, context for your family right now, and then we'll kind of dive back into each one of your stories. So together, what does family look like for Jim and Ginger Ravella?
Well, we live in Franklin, Tennessee, and we are a military family. I think once a military family, always a military family, even though Jim is retired. And I have gotten the privilege to mother and raise 5 children and 2 stepkids, Jim's boys, and be a military wife 2 times over. And I wouldn't be sitting where I'm sitting today, probably on your podcast, or even have the health that I have without the Lord being my compass. Even when I wasn't looking to Him for direction, He was constantly guiding my journey. And even though I didn't grow up in a military family or a large family, even at that, I've gotten to just sit in a very privileged space and just having a conversation with you about all that God has taught me and shown me in the last 50 years of living. And I'm just, I'm grateful to be here. So thanks for having us.
That's so awesome. Jim, tell us a little bit about, what you do. And, our listeners already know how we got connected, but I'd love for them to hear from you.
I currently work for the Gary Sneeze Foundation. So I've been in nonprofit for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was active duty Air Force. I was a pilot for 27 years, basically. I flew F-15s. And I got to live my lifelong dream, which was to be a pilot. My father was a pilot in the Air Force, started in World War II. And that was always my dream and my passion. So I'm very thankful that God gave me that opportunity to do what I always wanted to do. It was fulfilling. And But now what life looks like with Ginger, obviously we've both remarried, and now we're a family of 7. So I have been, as I look at it, my life is I've been parenting since 1985, which was my first son was born. So as we kind of joke about when the last 2 walk out the door, I'll be just approaching almost 40 years of parenting. So I have 2 sons that my first wife and I had, one of adopted, one of natural, and then I adopted Ginger's 5 children after we were married. So I have 6 adopted kids and one natural. So life has always just been busy, as you can imagine, but beautiful in the way that God has literally walked with us every step of the way and shown us His love. And I'm very thankful.
I owe Jim a big fishing trip or something at the end of this journey.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, what's so interesting to me is that, we sit here and we're trying to squeeze this time together to tell your stories together and how God will, we could sit here and talk for hours and hours and hours about all of the ways that God has been faithful in your journey. Jim, when I met you at the Widower Retreat, I was just so blown away by your depth of wisdom, your experience, the unique role that you brought to that space. And what I marvel at right now is the fact that both of you guys have said throughout the entire journey, the Lord has walked with us. And yet, as we're going to find out here in a second, your pathway has been marked by a lot of pain, by loss and hardship. And so why don't you guys dive a little bit into that? I know obviously your stories are 2 stories that are converging. And so Ginger, if you want to take it first and kind of talk about your path, and then Jim can go.
Yeah, I married my college sweetheart. His name was Troy. He was a Texas boy, and he was the son of an Air Force family. So he was familiar with that life. I wasn't, but I just fell in love with him and would have followed him till, whatever he was going to do. If he was going to be a plumber or he was going to be a fighter pilot. And I knew that I was supposed to be by his side. And so we got married right after college, and he joined the Air Force. And we, in the 13 years that we had the privilege of being married, we moved 11 times to 2 different countries all over the United States. We had 5 children together. And in September of 2006, he deployed to Iraq. And At the time, we had 5 children who were under the age of 8, an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old. Those were our sons, and then 3 little girls who the oldest was 3, and twin girls that were 6 months old. And so, we had a busy life, and Troy was instructing guys how to fly the F-16 in the Air Force. He was working for President Bush as an advance agent for Air Force One, and he was the wing commander's executive flying aide. So he was super busy, but it was not supposed to be an assignment where he was going to deploy, and so kind of rested in that. Even though he worked 12-hour days, it was okay because he wasn't going in harm's way in my mind. And so when he left, it was a turn of events that I wasn't expecting, but I also was super confident that the 4.5 months would be the hardest that I'd probably ever gone through in my life. But also, I was so proud of him, and I thought, this has an end. This has an end date. Yeah. And so, 3 months into that deployment, when I got a knock at the front door on a Monday morning, right after Thanksgiving, I can't say that it was a scenario I'd ever played through in my mind. And they came in and told me that Troy's F-16 had gone down in Baghdad in a combat mission earlier that morning, and it had hit the news, of course. And they wanted me to know that that was all the information they had, and they would come back and let me know as things unfolded. And so, I don't remember a lot about that conversation other than I just remember screaming, we have 5 kids. This isn't happening. This just isn't happening. And Troy was like the stellar fighter pilot. He was there to teach guys how to fly in combat. So there was no way he didn't know what to do or something. It just was never an option in my mind that the Lord would allow in 2 people who have really were living out their faith. I mean, we were, lights in our community, and to church, and in the squadron, and women's ministry, and welcome ministry, and parenting classes. And it's like, Lord, this was not our deal. This was not the contract. And so, I figured though he must have ejected. He may be injured, but I'm sure that he made it out alive. And so when they came back and knocked on my door a second time, 8 hours later, and told me that when they had gotten into the crash site, and upon viewing surveillance video from a predator that had been filming the whole scenario where Troy had gone in, had saved a special operations unit that had a crash landing, and were being overrun by Iraqi insurgents. And so Troy comes in flying low and fast, in a very dangerous tactical maneuver to save their lives using the gun on the F-16. He lost his, and the film showed that within maybe 15 minutes of the crash, before our U.S. military got into the crash site, that the Iraqis that he was tailing got to him first. And so they had unharnessed him from the jet seat and had rolled him up in a carpet and had put him in the back of a pickup truck and taken him as a war trophy. And, I was 36 years old, and I had 5 little kids, and I had no idea, I had no framework for what to do with that kind of nightmare. Yeah. And I found out, within about 5 days, that from DNA from the crash site, that there was no way Troy could have survived. There was some skull fragments remaining in the jet wreckage, and they said, he couldn't have lived, missing that part of his skull. But I knew he was home with the Lord, and I had peace in that. But I had peace in nothing else.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Ginger, that what you just described is every military spouse's worst nightmare is receiving that knock on the door. And, there are a lot of folks that in anxiousness or in worry that they play that scenario out, as if it's going to happen, or they're concerned that it will, or they're afraid, or they, push it off as if I don't ever want that to happen, but that's in the back of their mind. You said that was a scenario that you had not seen play out at all in your plan. What do you attribute that to?
I think, I've always been an eternal optimist probably in life. And I think, again, I was reliant upon this silent handshake thing that I thought that we had with the Lord, that he was not going to allow, that kind of suffering. I mean, suffering to me, that never would have happened to us, because I mean, how could it, right? We loved him, and he's a loving God, and just trying to reconcile that. So I think those two things, really, and maybe that was great. I didn't live with fear. I lived every day like there was always going to be a tomorrow, and now I don't. And there's also some beauty in that as well.
Yeah. What you're describing is, really a place that every single one of us come to in the moments thereafter that we experience this loss, especially those of us who are, like you said, following the Lord. We tend to think that we're really impervious to pain, to grief, to loss, to hardship. When I lost my wife, we were church planters. We left everything that was comfortable, that was like the dream job, to go and pursue this really difficult task. But, at least there was this, like you said, this silent handshake, this deal that we have with the Lord. And I had to do some untangling of that as well in the immediate aftermath and the years to follow. But I wonder where you were at with the Lord. What in that immediate aftermath, you've got 5 kids, there's all the craziness, right? But where are you at? What did God show up for you there? What happened?
He showed up for me, yes. And was I angry? And did I shake my fist at him? Yes, I did both, and went to a really dark place of depression and anxiety and insomnia that really wreaked havoc, played into a lot of that. And really, I honestly prayed every single day. I believe for about 4 or 5 months that the Lord would just take us all home. Yeah. I wasn't going to take my life, but I would have signed up for pretty much any plane going down and bought all of my kids and I tickets if I would have known that would have been the outcome, because I didn't see a way out. And I didn't see that God could, how could Romans 8:28 be really true for me in this scenario? And I really wrestled with him. And I think, as believers, we have to be okay with the wrestling. And that's uncomfortable, especially for those of us that haven't done it before. And I think for the outside world, especially because we were sort of on a platform of church leadership, then you really feel like, oh gosh, I can't be struggling with my faith because I'm going to let all these other people down. And I just think the longer I live, I'm like, God can take it. And those are the testimonies that have really, if you've been through the fire, and that was really what I feel like was Jim and I both, we went through the fire and we found out that there was one with us, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah. And I had to start, really living like I was going to live again, even when I didn't feel it. And I had another widow that came into my life, because I didn't really know any widows unless they were like 80, at church. I had a young widow come into my life and my story that I didn't know, and just spoke some real honest truth, like, you're going to have to, like, your story's not over. And when it's over, you'll know it. And you have to keep saying yes and getting up every day and being faithful to a God that still loves you and wasn't changing. And that's really, where Jim and our lives intersected was just those very words. Like, God is unchanging, even though your circumstances may drastically change.
Wow. Okay, in just a second, Jim, I want you to talk to us about your story. But there's something you said, Jim, and I hate to, this is probably going to be a spoiler alert, but I think it's so appropriate to what you've just set up for us, Ginger. But something you said at the widower retreat. I've actually already said it on the podcast in an intro and outro as we were having conversations, because it was one of those moments, Jim, that like I felt seen and understood for the first time in this context. And what you said was something to the effect of, the most private or personal thing about you has now become the most public thing about you. And Ginger, as you lost Troy and you're in this church leadership platform, and then you're also in this military community platform, he's become a war hero. This has been something that became very public for you as well. How did you navigate those things?
It did. We had to have guards at our front door. We had the news hounding, trying to take pictures of the kids. And Troy's, his body was filmed by the insurgents that took him, dragged through the streets, as propaganda, anti-America, anti-Bush, everything. I mean, it was like I was having briefings every day. We were on Fox and CNN, and I was like, wait, I was just a soccer mom yesterday. Yeah. I mean, what in the world? But I saw in those days where we really were in a public view that it was like I needed to just be me. I needed to be real. I needed to be raw and say when the days were hard and long, and say when God was faithful. And so I'm really thankful for the way that the Lord, allowed Troy to go home, because it was he lived a life till the bitter end about other people and about true servant leadership, and he loved Jesus with all of his heart. And do I think he made the choice to leave us that day? No. But do I think that he made the choice to put his life on the line to love another? Yes, I do. And I will, to the end of my days, I will want to share Troy's story, but the bigger story of just God's story. And so I didn't have any training on how to do that, but I feel grateful that I've had the platform.
Wow. Wow. Well, Scripture says greater love is no man, that he would lay down his life for his friend. And not many of us in life are put in a position where we have to lay down our life for our friend, at least lay down our physical life. We're dying every day for people that we love. That's the death and the spiritual. That's the way that we're playing this out as followers of Jesus. But your late husband, he put himself in a position where he was willing to lay his life down for a friend. And so he's a hero, not just on an earthly, standpoint, the earthly standard, but also in a heavenly standard. And, we'll come back to you in a second, Ginger, and talk a little bit about some of that healing process, because I know Jim plays into that. While you're experiencing this loss and this grief, Jim is experiencing his own as well. Jim, talk to us a little bit about your journey there.
Yeah. So for my journey started in 2003 when my wife found a lump in her left breast and went in and found out that it was cancerous. So that began, the shaking of our world, of the contract that we had with God. Same contract Ginger felt she had. A common thought, I think, in an American church of when we are so concerned about comfort, and that becomes such a priority to us, that we think God's priority for us in our life is for us to be comfortable. And my thought was, God loves me too much to let comfort come in the way of my spiritual growth and me having a relationship with him. And so God brought us into a trial where he drew me close to him in a way that could not have happened without it. So we began a 4.5-year journey of cancer treatment that so many people know and can relate to. It happens every day, unfortunately, and to thousands upon thousands of people, but it was personal to us. And so when fast forward, Andrea's been in treatment for about 3 years. She's terminal, and we are at chemo, and we get the news that an F-16 had crashed in Iraq and the pilot was killed, and he was the father of 5 children. Of course, that was Ginger's story. I didn't know Troy, but I knew I was flying fighters in North Carolina, and Troy was out of Arizona at the time, but we knew his story. And we as a squadron and a base, raised money for this family and sent support out to her to let her know that the fighter community is grieving with her and feel that loss for all of us. So that was 2006 and for November for Ginger. And then in January of 2007, so shortly after Ginger has suffered her loss and she's in her dark places, my wife gets put into the ICU, and the doctor says, I think this is what's going to take your wife. And so I went home that night after seeing her on a ventilator and realizing how sick she was and knowing the reality of what was happening, and wrote an email to my friends and said, explaining the situation. And I just said, God is unchanging though. His love cannot be circumstantial. I can't look at what's happening and see sadness and then apply that to God and who he is to me. Like, he is now bad because this is bad. God had to be unchanging. That's who he said he was. And I had to believe that, even though I didn't understand what I was seeing and I couldn't understand it in what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
I had to know that that was true. I needed an anchor, and I needed a God that was sovereign and unchanging, even if it meant I wasn't going to get what I wanted. And so I sent the email, and it got forwarded from a friend to this widow in Arizona named Ginger.
Wow.
And she read it and wrote back and said, I would like to talk to this couple. And began a 10-month email exchange between my wife, thankfully came out of ICU, and became an email exchange between Andrea, myself, and this widow in Phoenix who was in a dark place.
Wow.
Who wrote some pretty scary emails of what it was like to suffer and grieve and not understand God and be angry at God. And we did our best to help, because we felt we had dealt with death for a long time, so we could speak with authority into her life. And we helped as much as we could. And then my wife ends up at the end of that year. So around the 1-year anniversary of Troy's crash, Andrea's back in ICU. Unfortunately, this time she does not come out, and she passes 3 weeks later. And Ginger wrote me and said, hey, I heard, and if you want to talk, I'm here for you. You helped me. And I said, I'm sorry for anything I said to you that was stupid.
Wow.
Because I thought I understood what you were going through and what death was and pain. And because I had known and I'd lived with death, but I hadn't experienced it. And I just thought I did not know what I was talking about because I couldn't comprehend this grief that I had.
Yeah.
And there I was in the dark place I saw her in. And so
man,
we ended up in Texas, through God moments. We both ended up in Texas, in Dallas on the same day. And we said, well, let's just meet and say hi because we'd only emailed. And so we met at the Four Seasons Hotel in Dallas in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And it was Christmas Day, which neither of us really knew because we were kind of running from Christmas.
Right.
We just parked and got out of the car and looked at each other and just hugged each other.
Wow.
And I just knew, I knew this is, truthfully, God had brought Ginger in my life for more than just a conversation.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of our journey together. So,
wow. Isn't it crazy the connection that happens between two people who have experienced that kind of depth of loss?
Mm-hmm.
I experience it every time I, speak at a church or something and someone comes up and they share their story with me and it grips me. Or maybe it's very similar to my story or something. And it's like, it just overwhelms you. There's this weird connection in the spiritual paradigm is what it feels like. It's like all of these things that you could say, but they can be left unsaid because you just get.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, we always say that, the veil to me gets very thin between heaven and earth when you've really walked a road of suffering with Jesus. And so it automatically, you have credibility, you have, you just have an insight into someone's soul just in a deeper level than you do before. And I think, as we go on now and we minister to widows and widowers and it just, you can sit with people in their pain in a different way than you could have without it.
Absolutely. Ginger, what motivated you to reach out when you were in such a dark place, right? And was it something where you were just grappling for some kind of sense of an anchor and like, give me some answers here? What was it that motivated you to reach out in that situation?
I do believe it was the Holy Spirit that night because I was really overrun by emails and phone calls and letters. And like I said, our story was so public. It was so in the public eye that I was just barely hanging on by a thread. So I didn't even return. I didn't return my mother's phone call half the time. And so the fact that I was up that night and I saw that email, and I think the friend that sent it to me, her name is Jennifer, and she said, I don't know. I think her first line was, I don't know these people and I don't know what to say to you, but I want to forward this. And I think that got my attention when she said, I don't know what to say to you. Because when people kind of come at you with like, here's everything you need to do, and here's everything that you need to know, I think that's when you're like, you don't have that kind of authority in my life. But when she said, I don't know what to say, but I know you're struggling in your faith. And I was transparent in that. And I'm really grateful I was, because I've talked to a lot of people like you, Davey, after I speak, and people will share something with me that they haven't shared with anybody in 40 years about a pain, a trauma that has been so private. And I am all for like, you got to get this out to the light, because it's in the light that there's healing and that you can find support and help. And so I love your podcast. That's exactly what you're doing. It's we're going to let people share their stories in hopes that now you'll share yours openly.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to note this, as you guys were both walking through, some of your story timeline, just note this for the listener, that each one of you got emotional doing it. Right. And I think that's what we're afraid of so many times, is we're afraid, well, if I start sharing this, I don't know how I'm going to be able to control the emotions that are coming out. And I always try to help people understand, don't worry about that, because that's part of the process. There's layers and layers and layers of healing that has to happen. And the only way that can happen is through us externalizing this story and getting it out there, because then we get to see the God story in it.
Right.
Then we get to see how God is beginning to weave and work in our stories. And it's those moments that make us feel overwhelmed by emotion, both in sadness and in joy, of going, man, God's in this. This is overwhelming how much he is present in all of this.
Well, we can believe lies. It's very easy. Satan comes in at our weakest moments to tell us things that aren't true about the God that maybe we've always loved, or a God that we don't even know. Yeah. And so I think, when you can bring him to light in safe places where people can speak truth over you and sing over you, as I believe the Lord just sings over us in those moments of sorrow. And Jim spoke truth into my life, and Andrea did for those 10 months. And then now I thought, I'm a little bit ahead of him. I can now reciprocate and speak some truth into his journey, never really imagining, where that it would end up with us getting married, but here we are.
That's so powerful too, because Jim, I marvel at, even the humility to say, hey, I'm so sorry, because I was saying things to you and I wasn't fully understanding, and to be able to articulate that. And then how just crazy providential it is, as you just talked about that, Ginger, that now the roles kind of get reversed in a little bit, and you're ministering to each other. And then there's this crazy, weird connection that's happening between the two of you, and God begins to write your story together. Talk to me about the ways that you saw God showing up in this thing now, as you guys were beginning to, interact with each other, and this connection was forming.
Well, the first thing was, so when I first met Andrea, I was 18, and she was in the car next to me at a street light. Actually, I was a passenger and she was the driver next to me, and I looked over and I just thought, what is it about that girl? Something about her I want. And it wasn't anything physical. I couldn't see her. It was just something in her eyes. I said, there's something special about that person sitting next to me, the stranger. And we just started talking. And then we pulled over and kept the conversation going. And I was 2 months later, I asked her to marry me. I was 18. I'd never really dated. I just knew it. I couldn't tell you the conviction I had in my spirit, like, this is her. She is the one. Wow. And I asked Andrew to marry me. And 3 years later, when I got out of college, we got married. And as I journeyed through life, being raised in a Catholic home, I really had no relationship with the Lord. That's just how it was for me. I had religion. I knew of religion, but I didn't know God, and I didn't know anything about him, and that he cared about me, and that he would care anything about what I did every day. But she did. She was a Pentecostal preacher's daughter and full of faith, and God was so real in her life and so active that's what I saw in her, and that's what I wanted. And through our journey in almost 25 years of marriage, that's what I learned living beside her. And it's really what I saw lived out in her cancer, in her journey to death, a faithful journey in laying her life down.
Wow.
And so that's when I saw Ginger, and I felt a similar feeling. I was, of course, a little bit scared and confused. It had only been a week. I'll be honest with your listeners, it's only been a week since my wife had passed, and that is insane. But I went home and I was reading through Andrew's journals. She has a lot of writings, and I found one from probably 1993. So this is 10 years before she ever had cancer.
Wow.
And it was just a dream she had. And she said, I had a dream last night that I found a lump. And the doctor told me I had 6 months to live. And she said, I went to Nick, who was our son. And he said, I told him, Nick, you're going to be okay. Don't worry. And she said, I went to Jim and I said, Jim, you need to remarry. And Jim asked me, how will I know who is the right one? And she wrote, I told him, you will know just like you knew with me. And she said, what a sad dream. And I read that dream and I went, wow. That was a God moment.
Wow.
That was an unmistakable God moment. I said, I do not understand this. My youngest son was 15. I was a colonel in the Air Force. I was close to retirement. And I had met this woman who had a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and twin 2-year-olds. And I went, this is what God's asking me to do. And I watched Andrea lay down and stretch her arms out as if she was on a cross and laid her life down in front of me and in faithful service to God of the path he asked her to walk. And I went, am I going to not walk the journey I feel he's calling me to because it seems like it would be hard in my physical life to go, I got to become a dad again to babies in diapers. And I went, I'm not saying no. How could I say no after what I just witnessed? And 5 months later, we were married and we began our life together. So it started with a God moment right off the bat.
Jeez. Wow. Here's the thing, and I'm sure you guys experience this too. You can talk to two different groups of people and you can share those stories, and one group just gets absolute chills all the way through their body, and they recognize, wow, God was in this, and how good is God, right? Mm-hmm. And other people would go, wow, God was in this, and how sick and twisted is that?
Yeah.
So as you kind of think through that, and because you guys, same question that you had, Ginger, how could God allow this, right? How do you guys untangle that? What makes you go, wow, God is in this and he is good?
Yeah. I think, Davey, that I saw that no matter how far I would run from him, he was always right behind me, because he was always running after me, and that he would provide what I needed for that day. And I really understood that scripture, that talks about the manna for the Israelites, because sometimes it was just, I only had enough for an hour, but he'd give me what I needed for the next hour. And when I actually opened my spiritual eyes to really recognize that, I think I saw him in a whole different light. And it wasn't that everything was tied up in a bow, because it took, when Jim and I came together, we had his son was angry. Of course, it was soon, it was fast. They were young adults. I have grieving kids. It's not easy to come together, when you've had two really happy marriages that you never wanted to end, and then you're thrown into a new one and so quickly. And then, Troy's body was still missing. The search was still going on. So my funerals would be ongoing. We had 3 burials, ultimately, for Troy as he came home in pieces from Iraq. And so it was I think my understanding prior to what happened to me was just to think that everything gets tied up in a bow and then your faith is going to shine. Yeah. And I realized that your faith is way shinier and brighter when it's not finished, and we're still in it. We're still, we're still in some spiritual battles. with our kids, with with just trying to figure out, Lord, what do you have next for us? But I trust him in a way now, because I've seen his goodness in the land of the living, and not just for heaven, which is kind of what I thought. I think after Troy died, was like, well, I guess I'll just make some crosshatch marks on the wall of this prison life that I'm going to live until the day he takes me home. And I just, now I see, like, even in sorrow and darkness and trials and tribulation and tragedy, like, he is still so good, and there is still hope, and we found it.
Yeah. Because God is, as you face a trial, and we all grapple with why, right? That's our first reaction, because how can a good God make this hard on me? Right. That's our earthly perspective of God. He should be making my life good, the contract we talked about. And we gladly, as believers, accept the goodness of the cross, the salvation we didn't deserve, that we did nothing for other than accept him. We run to that and we cling to it, and we're thankful for it. But being a Christian and a Christ follower, does at times mean you're going to do some things that are hard. And sometimes the cross demands of us things sacrificially. And as a believer, I couldn't let God just be a genie to me. Yeah. That I needed, and I would rub the lamp, and he would come out, give me what I wanted, and I'd put him away to live my life. And I just brought him in when the need was there, and he met it, and then I put him away. And that wasn't a Christian walk for me. And I've learned that through 4.5 years of going through cancer. So my journey of the answer of why, thankfully I processed with my wife, Andrea. Unfortunately, Ginger's processing of that was alone, which is the difference of our journeys. But I just looked at the cross and when I knelt at the cross, and I would put my hands in the dirt that was wet with his blood, and I would think I would touch that cross, and I would feel the roughness of the wood. And then I would look at him, underneath him, and look up with his arms stretched out and his head hanging. And him saying to me, "This is how much I love you, Jim."
Wow.
And then I would say to him, "But I'm not willing to do something hard for you." And I thought, how can I do that? That's my response to what he just gave me, has to be, where do you want me to go? So if I hear God calling me to do something that's hard, I don't want to run from that and be scared from it. I really want to listen and pray and say, "God, is that really you?" Yeah. Like, that's something I want to do, but are you telling me to do that? Because we will gladly hear what we want. I can pray to God for something I want, and I'll hear my answer that I want to hear. And I think I did that a long time with Andrea's cancer. I prayed for her healing so hard, and so that I would not hear any other answer from God except she's going to be healed. I was hearing my voice echo back to me in my prayers. I would go, "Oh, Andrew's going to be healed." But it was really just me not allowing God to say anything else but what I wanted to hear. And that's hard when it's your wife and her life, the greatest, and I'm going to say, "God, I'm willing to hear what I don't want to hear." And that's where I had to get in my prayer life. "God, I'm closing off my desires, and tell me what you want. You are bigger than this moment. And if this is your calling on our life, let's walk it with faith." And I don't want to run from it, because in wherever it is, if it's his will, it's where you want to be.
Right.
Even if it's the hardest, most hurtful thing you could do, in that moment is where God is. Yeah. And what he's calling you through for whatever reason and purpose. And that's where I think you have to go when you deal with what's hard in life and things you may not want to do or seem crazy, like marrying someone in 5 months that has a lot of kids. That's everybody's telling you is crazy.
I always say we were like Jim's mission trip to Africa. He was called.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Anyway.
Well, a couple things that I just noted as you guys were talking there. One, Ginger, you said it. We're still in the thick of it. I think a lot of times people think that the bow gets tied on a story like this, and it's like, wow, you had this loss, and then you met each other, and boom, magically everything's all better. And that's not at all the case. And that's what we want to encourage those of you guys who are listening to this, and maybe you're feeling that. You're like, where's my redemption story? That's the question we get a lot. Where's my redemption story? And I always tell people that Your redemption story begins when you choose to take your pain and turn it around to help other people.
Right.
That's redemption. Some of these things where God restores things back to us, never to replace what we had, but to fill in those spaces, right? Those are just icing on the cake. Those are the things that show us the goodness of God here in the land of the living. But redemption is doing exactly what you guys are doing, is walking in faith in the midst of the darkness and helping other people to see who God really is and how he can be trusted and how he is faithful in the midst of all of these things.
Right.
One of the stories, Jim, that you told me at the widow retreat, and I was blown away by it. I would love for you guys to share this. However you're accustomed to sharing it, is how that 10-year period that Troy's body was brought over to the United States, that to me was such a God thing. And I want our listeners to hear this story.
Well, in 2006, he dies. In 2013, we had some of his toe bones returned to the embassy in Jordan by an Iraqi who, they wanted money, they wanted fame for having him, and our military, our Air Force searched after those toe bones were turned into that embassy and sent back to the States. And, they were cross-matched and they were Troy's, and so they thought for sure they would find him. And they dug up. Our military dug up 100 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of graves in Iraq, trying to find Troy's body. And after that fruitless year, they came to me and said, "We have these toe bones, and what do you want us to do with them?" And I said, "Well, we're going back to Arlington. We're going to go bury those toe bones with a little bit of skull fragments." And when I was talking to the Air Force medical examiner over the phone, and this has been 7 years since Troy died, so there have been a lot of healing. There have been some perspective, some strength, that he had given me in that time. And I said, I really want to understand to this medical examiner. I want to know what am I burying, because I've got to understand it to be able to explain it to my children. What was buried before, what is buried now? And he hesitated, like, "Ma'am, I don't know that you really want to hear this." And I said, "I want to hear." And he said, "Well, it's maybe 60 paper clips worth of weight of skull fragments. The top of Troy's skull was what you buried in 2006. And now, here 7 years later, you'll be burying the tips of his digits of his toes, phalanges or something." I was like, I need, what's the real regular word for that? And he said, "Just toe bones." He said, "Right, the bones right at the tip of his toes." So in that moment, Davey, I began to weep, because what the Lord so clearly was showing me was, you're burying the top of his head and the tip of his toes. Wow. And you know what? I've got the rest of him. And I've got you, and I've shown you in 7 years my faithfulness and my goodness. And I went to that grave 7 years later with kids who are grown, right? I mean, I've got kids who are in college at this point, and we stood there as a testimony that, and it wasn't all finished. He wasn't in there, but that God was faithful, and he had us. And though I prayed for his return, I fully prayed for his return, I still had a peace walking away from that grave the second time, knowing whatever comes or whatever doesn't, my God is faithful. Yeah. And so, in just 6 years, or let's see, that was 2013. So 3 years after that, I was just at a volleyball tournament with my daughter, who was in the 8th grade, and the general called that Troy served under, and he said the 3 words I'd been longing to hear and praying for 10 years, which is, "Troy's been found." And I wept, and the story was amazing and epic, and one of those Hollywood movie type stories, where guys went in the middle of the night, and a rescue mission, unprecedented in Iraq, and got him back. And so we went back for this homecoming. And it wasn't the homecoming that I thought. I thought our homecoming was going to be 4 months after the deployment started at the airport, with my kids in red, white, and blue uniform, little outfits and signs and balloons saying, "Welcome home, Daddy." And it wasn't. It was, on the tarmac in Dover, Delaware, watching his body be carried in a flag draped coffin. But it was an answer to prayer.
Yeah.
And so my kids have watched a miracle happen, and that's what I hope they'll never forget. And it's really what our military is about. And as we look to Veterans Day and honor those that serve, I mean, that is the epitome of what they do, which is
right.
They never leave behind a brother on the field of battle. So help them God. And I'm so grateful of the bittersweet, things that have come into my life because of being a part of the military have also been, it's been some of the most powerful, poignant, beautiful moments of my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I think what's so beautiful about that story, and even the phases in which Troy's body was brought over, is there was a season where like you said, the top of his head, the bottom of his feet, that was it, right? These bookends of his body, and essentially the tomb was empty.
Yeah.
Which is this glaring reminder to us, right? That our hope is in the resurrection, that the tomb is empty. And that's why we can look to a different day. We can look to a different reality. We can look into eternity, and we can know and hope that there's something beyond all of this. And then the Lord was faithful to say, okay, now I've got more for you in this. And I want to, I want to bring this into your life so that you can, there's just so many beautiful things about the way God was doing that in your story. And I'm sure you've noted so many of those as you've, walked this journey in that, that I'm blown away by that. I'm blown away. Every time I hear the testimony of somebody in this kind of a way, I'm just like, God, you are so good. So good.
He didn't have to love us like he did, and he did. And I when I was getting ready just 30 minutes ago before we started this podcast, I just threw on this sweatshirt, and then after I got ready, I said, Jim, is Davey going to show us on camera? Or is this just it? And he said, yeah, I think he is. And I'm like, I got to go change clothes. I have a sweatshirt on. And then I was like, no, my sweatshirt says hallelujah anyway.
That's right.
And I'm keeping it on. So.
That's right. That's amazing. That's amazing. You guys have written this book together. I've got it right here. It's called Hope Found. And, as I've been thumbing through it, I haven't had a chance to read all of it because Jim, you just gave this to me just last week. But I'm blown away by the way that you guys have woven these stories together, and how you're, obviously it's God's story in the whole thing, right? How He's woven your paths together. But I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about this and what your hope is for this book, Hope Found.
Well, it's just that it's written to anybody who's going through a trial, no matter, it doesn't have to be loss and death. Some people go, oh, I didn't have anything that bad. I go, it doesn't matter. If you're struggling with trying to figure out who God is, what you expected of Him, and what's happening to you, that's what the book is to speak to you about. It's to show you kind of our journey. So it's a chapter of Ginger's story, a chapter of my story, a chapter of our story together. And then from then on, the book is just things that we felt we had learned about God and who He is and His character, and through separate voices of experiences that we had. So truthfully, you could pick up any chapter of that book and go, I just want to, what did we learn about God being sovereign? And it may be my voice saying, this is what I learned, in Ginger's voice. And it's just, from then on, it's a dual voice. So it's to give hope. I mean, the cover of that book is a plant growing out of a rocky soil.
Yeah.
When I lost Andrea, a friend of mine lived in Hawaii, and I went out to see him just to get away. And she took us out to where the volcano was erupting, and we went onto this field, and it was just lava, hardened lava. Everything was gone. It was just total destruction. And I looked down, and there was this little plant growing out of the crack of that lava. And I said, that's what I feel like.
Yeah.
But life comes back, and God is faithful. And that plant represented to me life that continues out of what we feel is destruction.
Wow.
And that's the cover of the book. And I think that's our hope. I don't know, what would you think?
Wow.
Yeah, I think, what Jim and I wrote about. This is a dual voice book, male, female, mother, father. And but really what it is it was like two totally different journeys, but God is the same God. And that's what we talk about, and what I share about in our widows ministry, Never Alone Widows retreats. And I know what y'all are doing with your retreats is just to really say, all of our journeys are super different. What you walked through, Davey, was not what Jim and I experienced. Yeah. But God, his love, who he is, his characteristics, it's all the same. And so in that we can come together with one truth and a whole bunch of different stories. Yeah. So that's really what the book's about.
Wow.
And in the midst of that, in the midst of your trial, that there is always hope because God is faithful. And no matter what you see or what you feel or how dark it is, and we have both been in places so dark that literally we couldn't tell which way was up. And I know some of your listeners have been there. It's a scary place where you feel like I don't even know where up and down is or any direction. But through faith and through God and through what he's probably shown you in your life, if you look back at things he's done for you, you will see hope. And we cannot as humans live without hope. Yeah. And there is no other hope than Christ. And that's what we have to remember. So the book is to remind people that in the midst of whatever you're going through, there is always hope.
Yeah.
And we still preach it to ourselves, Davey.
Right. We got to get it too.
This morning.
That's right.
It's so true. It's so true. And Ginger, I'm glad you don't gloss over that. I'm so glad, because every single one of us are in a similar journey as you guys. We all feel it. We're like, we're still in the throes of all of this. We're still in the midst of all of this. We're in the already not yet season. That's what life is, right? Until we step into the shores of eternity, until our bodies are completely glorified, until we fully and finally realize our Savior and we're staring him in the face, it's going to be this hard tension. And as long as we understand that, if we're not making these false agreements with God or these, contracts with him, if we understand what Jesus said, that in this world we will have sorrow, and yet we can take heart because he has overcome the world. Then we can walk.
My favorite scripture, and you didn't even know that.
Yeah, I had no idea.
It's true.
Man. Guys, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Again, I wish we could sit here and talk for hours and hours and hours. And once you're a part of the Nothing is Wasted community, you're always a part of it. And so I'm sure we're going to have you back to talk more about all kinds of different stuff and the things that God's teaching you. But I'm so grateful for you making this time for this special Veterans Day episode, and thankful for how you've been walking out your stories.
Well, thank you. And to all your listeners, you're in our prayers. It's whatever struggle you're going through. Never lose sight of the hope you have in Christ.
Nothing is wasted. You're right. Yep. Perfect name.
And nothing's wasted.
Yeah.
He'll use it. Allow him to use you always. And he'll take your pain and bless someone.